Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Vincent Xavier, pastor of New Wine Ministries. Great to be with you today. It is Wednesday, and today is the day that we get to talk to our dear friend from Australia, Daniel Secomb. We're looking forward to his arrival here in just a moment. And by the way, in 1 hour, we will be heading over to Secomb Radio, which is an AM/FM radio station here locally throughout the 3 states of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, where I'll be interviewing and spending some time with our dear friend Ian Rude, and we'll be talking about things that are going on across the country. Daniel Secomb is not a stranger to our broadcast. He's been around for quite some time. God has launched that young man to nations, and he's going to continue to do his work. So we will be looking forward to that. I just want to say that the Lord Jesus Christ is good. And I want to continue to boast in the Lord Jesus Christ and thank him for his glorious salvation. I want to thank our Father in heaven for the wonderful salvation he has given us in his Son. And I love these words coming out of the Gospel of John, where Jesus said, "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Continue ye in my love. If you keep my commandments, you shall abide in my love, even as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things have I spoken unto you, that my joy might remain in you, and that your joy might be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do whatsoever I command you." Praise the Lord. Henceforth, Jesus said, "I call you not servants, for the servant knows not what his Lord does, but I have called you friends. For all things that I have heard of my Father, I have made known unto you." You know, that's just a message that needs to be heard again and again and again. The message of every one of us who are believers and followers and disciples of Christ, that we would continue in the journey of discipleship, and that we would make sure that we understand that we are the branches in this journey and that he is the vine, and without him we can do nothing. And that his commandment to you and I is so easy, you would think. Love one another and to abide in him. And then we know that as we abide in him, that we could ask anything and he will do it. I mean, what a beautiful thing that he's asked us to do. And again, the reason why Yeshua, Jesus, has told you and I to love one another, honestly, so that our joy may be full. And I don't know about you, but I know that that is a craving desire of my heart, is to be filled with the joy of the Lord. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world, and it's getting closer and closer and heavier. And politically, they're going to resolve their issues one way or the other. But in the spirit world, understanding things from that spiritual perspective, that weight, that darkness, that gross darkness that Isaiah talked about is coming on the earth. And I don't want it to steal my joy. And you don't want your joy to be gone either. Why? Because the joy of the Lord is our strength. The joy of the Lord is our strength. And we have a lot of work to do. It's still light. We need to do the work that God has put in our hearts to do. The nighttime comes with that gross darkness that we won't be able to, but we need to be in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing with the right people at that time. An environment where the joy of the Lord is, an environment where the peace of God is, in spite of the storm or what's going on in the world. We must be about our Father's business, creating atmospheres and environments through praise and worship and fasting. We need to be a Christian community that knows how to walk into an environment and change it and shift it. And I believe the potential is there. The power is there to do it. It's just about being led by the Spirit and walking in the Spirit and creating that environment. In fact, there's a beautiful scripture I'm going to get into in just a little bit. Before I go any further, it's time to bring our dear friend, Brother Daniel, into the broadcast. And so let me welcome him both on Facebook. Good morning, Brother Daniel. How are you today, sir?
Very good. Great to see you, Vincent.
Oh, okay. This thing down just a little bit. We are as loud as peacocks screaming in the peacock field, whatever that means. So I'm hearing a lot of reverb. Are you normal as you've always been?
Yeah, I'm pretty normal. I'm a stable genius.
All right, maybe it's mine. What did I do here? Say that again. You're a stable genius?
I'm a stable genius.
Okay. Stability is the answer to everything. Hey Daniel, I'm hearing reverb for some reason. I'm hearing myself talking, and I don't
Oh,
know why. Let me see here. Okay. Hello?
yep.
Yeah, here we are. Okay. Well, we'll do the best we can with what we've got. I just won't talk. How are you?
I'm very good.
You're a
Very good.
genius. I love that.
Oh, that's not me. I borrowed that from President Trump.
Ah, I love that. I knew that was genius. Praise the Lord. Hey, Daniel, let's get
Yeah.
right into this because of our shortness of time. I wanted to ask you a question
Yeah.
today. How are things going in Australia? Are there any riotings or protests going on there as there are in London, Italy, Berlin, and other places around the world, Canada? What's going on in Australia?
Well, funny you should ask. There actually is. In fact, there are a bunch of Marxist groups that are actually pushing for very similar George Floyd style riots here in Australia, which is, I mean, you'd think, come on, this is Australia. You know, what are you thinking? You know, but these guys are Marxists, and as Saul Alinsky said, Saul Alinsky is probably what you would say is the father of the American left, said that never waste a crisis. Never let a crisis go to waste. And so, and the left are the same worldwide. If there's a crisis going on, they're not going to let it go to waste. And so this is what we're seeing happening in my own country. It's just extraordinary. Who would have thought that we would see this happening? By the way, this is a very predictable pattern. And the United States is the leader in this. Whenever there is a phenomenon that goes on in the US, whether it be mass protesting or whether it's some kind of... For example, let me just give you an example. When Colin Kaepernick and some of the other left-wing football players decided to take the knee and to protest police brutality, there were Australian football players that, like, we have a huge football, how would you say, series here called the State of Origin, where the New South Wales rugby league team, the New South Wales rugby league players play against Queensland rugby league players. It's a big deal. It's made up of 3 games, and they play them in the winter, and it's huge. Anyway, actually, it wasn't. It might have been something else. But anyway, there were some players that refused to sing the national anthem, which I think was an absolute disgrace. These players are privileged. They are privileged. Okay, they earn massive sums of money. They live a very privileged lifestyle, and yet they will not bring themselves to sing the Australian national anthem in pride because of the country that they live in. And so it just goes to show that it was America that set the trend, you know. And then there was the tearing down of statues, you know, the Confederate statues, and how they brought down. This was a big trend, probably 1 or 2 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, when it started. That trend started happening. Well, here in Australia, they started throwing paint upon statues of Captain Cook. He's the guy who's discovered Australia. And there are a bunch of other different statues that were vandalised. But this is a trend. It's like the leftists here in Australia copy what the leftist activists are doing in the United States. That said, it's also... there's mass protests in Trafalgar Square in London. So... it's just incredible, Vincent, and it just goes to show that Marxism, that the whole left-wing ideology, it's a globalist agenda. It doesn't have borders. It spreads across borders. In fact, and this is why we're seeing it happening, and it's really it's extraordinary times we're living in.
Yeah, they really are extraordinary times. Let me just, Daniel, they are. I want to do something real quick. I want to say good morning to our dear friend and brother, Gavin. Gavin's a 4-year-old. He's the grandson of Danny and Sally. He's listening to this radio broadcast right now. And I'm thinking, Gavin, good morning to you, young man. You're so loved, and you're such a rich blessing to your mom, your dad, your grandma, your grandpa, and everybody that knows you. And, you know, Daniel, I stop and think sometimes about the young children. You have young children growing up in a world that is kind of acting like, how do parents go out of their way, and grandparents go out of their way to protect the minds, the emotion, of what is going on. We do everything in our power to defend the innocent lives, right? And yet we're living in an environment where the sacredity, if you will, the sacredness of a young boy, a young girl, a child, a baby, has been under assault for a generation. And yet it's the responsibility of our community, our families, parents, to guard the well-being, to raise up our children in an environment that is, again, sacred and normal and protected. And one of the great verses, I just want to read this very quickly, if I may, coming out of Isaiah 4:5. And again, I've got to find out where my reverb is coming from. I keep hearing myself, and I don't know where that's happening. But anyways, Isaiah chapter 4, verse 5, the Lord will create. And this is a prophetic word to the community of saints that are out there. I believe this with all of my heart, that this is the true word of God prophetically to us in this hour. The Lord will create upon every dwelling place of Mount Zion and upon her assemblies a cloud and smoke by day, and the shining of a flaming fire by night. For upon all the glory shall be a defense. You see, I believe the glory is coming to the assemblies. I absolutely believe that the glory of God is coming into the places of worship that God is creating at this time. Not necessarily mega churches, but maybe just a few people gathered together in different places, that God is going to set a defense. How important is that, Daniel, right now?
Massive. And if the leftists understand just how crucial it is when it comes to raising a generation of future leftist activists, if they understand how crucial education is and the importance of forming young minds, then we should be more passionate about that, even more so. I think it's absolutely critical, and this is why the left targeted schools. This is why they focused on capturing universities and capturing the American Education Association. This is why it was such a big deal for them to do that, and this is why we've now got to the point where universities are overrun with Marxist professors. In fact, it was Dinesh D'Souza that said that there are more Marxists on the faculty of our elite colleges than there are in all of Russia and Eastern Europe. And that's absolutely the truth. In fact, there was another guy, David Horowitz, in his book Radical Son, because he used to be a communist, he says this, he says the situation in the universities was appalling. The Marxists and socialists who had been refuted by historical events were now the tenured establishment of the academic world. More Marxists could be found in the faculties of American colleges than in the entire former communist bloc. It's massive, and we need to understand this importance. And when you read the law, when you read Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers, God goes on and on about the importance of walking with your children and talking through with them the law, talking through with them. And this is such an important principle, because if we don't take up the responsibility to talk with our children and take an approach, not lazy parenting, but vigilant parenting, understanding that the world is evil out there, and the world is wanting to brainwash our kids. I mean, I think it was Vodi Borkman actually said, he said, we cannot continue to send our children to Caesar for their education and be surprised when they come home as Romans.
Daniel, excellent point. Could you do me one favor? Would you check your microphone sound levels? Are they high, low?
I'll let you check. I'll just have a check.
So just double check real quick. I love what Shan said. She said, I have a sensitive microphone. We are sensitive people once in a while.
Well, do you want me to log out and log back in?
No, because I want you to do the majority of talking. I wanted to ask you the question. Do you think it's strange? My friend Clarence Ellis sent me a video. Do you think it's strange that a couple of weeks ago, a week ago, that the left was telling everybody, stay home, there's a potential next second wave of coronavirus, and now the same people that were saying that are kind of advocating to the thousands and tens of thousands of people that are protesting shoulder to shoulder, gathering together all over the country, and there's nothing being said about that, basically virtually nothing. Do you find that a little strange?
Yes. I think it's really interesting when I see amazingly how especially the Democrat governors were so big on people staying home, and yet they're completely fine with people protesting. I think that is a massive double standard. And so I think it really does say a lot. Now, the coronavirus is real. It's not fake. It actually is a real virus. It is highly contagious. But the problem is that many of these governors are okay for their own people to go out and do to carry out their agenda, but they're not okay when it comes to Christians going to church. And it seems I've lost you, Vincent. Anyway, I'll stay in here. So that's So there's definitely been some double standards. So it's just incredible. I saw a meme that came up on my Facebook feed where it was just somebody looking with the facial expression like, "So we're not doing COVID-19 now," kind of a thing. And so it's and it's also interesting too. Like it's like 1 month after the other is one thing after another, and just as we come into June, we've got these massive riots going on. So it's interesting, and it just goes to show that God is trying to make it clear that He is trying to get our attention. God is trying to get our attention. He wants to get our attention, and it should be no mistake that this year, all of the things that Jesus spoke about, in Matthew 24 and 25, in Luke 21 and Mark 13, all the things that He warned about are actually happening right now. So, here He is. You're back.
Hello. I'm still trying to find out. I had a call come in about our audio, and I apologize. I don't know what the difference is. And they said that I was coming in real low and you were coming in real high. So I'm not, and I don't want to interrupt. So, Daniel, what I'd like to do for the next few minutes, I want to turn you loose. I need you to talk to the people today, and I'm just going to kind of I'm going to get out of the way for a moment and just to minister to the body, and and then I'll get in there once in a while. Okay. Take it.
No problem. So just as I was saying, the things that Jesus warned about. So Jesus, what was the first thing that He said? Well, the first thing that He says was, "Watch out that no one deceives you." That was the big one. And already, I mean, gosh, there is deception after deception after deception. And what I think is interesting is that if you try and say that there is an agenda behind these riots, that there is a lawless agenda, if you try and say that that there is activists involved behind the scenes doing this, such as Antifa, if you try and say that there are leftist billionaires that are funding all this, such as George Soros, if you say this, I mean, people look at you and think you're a conspiracy theorist, that you're a bit of a loon. And so it's just incredible that there is such disparity, and there is such confusion going on out there. People are just wondering, well, is that true, or is that true? How do I know this is true, and how do I know whether that's, and why is it that these pallets appeared in these cities where there are riots, and and who's behind dumping off these pallets of bricks, and what's the go behind that? And there's a lot of different information that's flying everywhere. And and you turn on the TV and they're saying one thing and then they're saying another, and there's some Democrat governors who are saying, "Oh no, it's white supremacists that are doing all this," which is I think was probably the most hilarious thing that they could possibly say, because there are celebrities that are actually funding the bail. They are paying for the bail costs. They are raising bail money to bail out these rioters and these protesters. And it's so funny, because one leftist actually said to one of these celebrities, I think it was Steve Carell, which I was really sad to actually learn that he was actually funding this bail money. But anyway, there was a leftist that criticized him. He said, "Oh, Steve, do you realize that you're funding white supremacists?" I just thought, oh my goodness. It's crazy. Jesus said, "Watch out that no one deceives you." In fact, in these last days, it's almost as if we are swimming in deception. You turn on your TV, you listen to the radio, you look on social media, and there's deception after deception after deception. It really is. It can be concerning. It can be really worrying. I mean, how do you combat this? How do you know that what's going on is actually legit? How do you know that what you're being taught isn't heresy? Or how do you know? How can you line all these things up? And I think that those are great questions. In regard to the Word of God, I think J.C. Ryle, the theologian J.C. Ryle, had it right when he said that, what is the best safeguard against false doctrine? He said the Bible regularly read, regularly prayed over, and regularly studied. Let me just say that again. What is the best safeguard for false doctrine? The Bible regularly read, regularly prayed over, and regularly studied. And I think that is probably the best antidote that you could ever possibly have to ensure that you're not wandering off into any particular doctrines. The other thing too is that we need to be careful that we don't run down any particular rabbit holes or conspiracy theories that are completely ungodly and unbiblical. Yes, there are things that are going on in the darkness, and yes, we have a responsibility as Christians to expose the fruitless deeds of the darkness, as it says in Ephesians. And yes, we are called to be the light. We are called to be salt and light. And salt prevents things from falling into decay, and light exposes things that are in darkness. And so we have a responsibility to expose wickedness. And so, but here's the thing: we need to be careful, and we need to be extremely vigilant and extremely discerning to ensure that we're not going off with some crazy conspiracy theories. Because what happens is it damages the credibility of the gospel. It damages your credibility, and it damages the credibility of the gospel. So do we need to ensure that what we're talking about has been fact-checked by not just by ourselves, but by credible people, obviously not by CNN or by the Washington Post or by any other far-left media outlet, but we need to be very careful. Now, practically speaking, there's some great news outlets out there for your news. Now, I would say that the Epoch Times is a great website or great news outlet. They're very, very good. Their journalistic standards are extremely high. And of course, there are many others. There's Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire, which I find to be quite good. And I've just discovered, as of late, probably over the past couple of months, I've noticed that the Wall Street Journal has been quite good. So their editorial standards have actually gone from being, I think they got embarrassed by the Russia hoax, and I think they're trying to restore some credibility. So the Wall Street Journal have been quite good. By the way, there has been an excellent opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal entitled "The Myth of Systemic Police Racism." And I will highly recommend it. If you're friends with me on Facebook, you can actually see the link that I've actually posted in regard to that piece. But I highly recommend it. It's called The Myth of Systemic Police Racism. And Heather McDonald, who wrote the piece, says that George Floyd's death in Minneapolis has revived the Obama-era narrative that law enforcement is endemically racist. On Friday, Barack Obama tweeted that for millions of black Americans, being treated differently by the criminal justice systems on account of race is tragically painful, maddeningly normal. Mr. Obama called on the police and the public to create a new normal in which bigotry no longer infects our institutions and our hearts. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous because it's not true. It's absolutely not true. Now, she goes on to say here, in 2019, police officers fatally shot 1,004 people, most of whom were armed or otherwise dangerous. African Americans were about a quarter of those killed by cops last year, 235, a ratio that has remained stable since 2015. That share of black victims is less than what the black crime rate would predict, since police shootings are a function of how officers encounter armed and violent suspects. In 2018, the latest year for which such data have been published, African Americans made up 53% of known homicide offenders in the US and commit about 60% of robberies, though they are just 13% of the population. And so it goes on. And it goes on, which absolutely demolishes the fake narrative that there is a problem with systemic racism within the police force. Now, of course, there are some racists. There are outliers. Okay, there are exceptions out there. There are policemen, unfortunately, who are bad cops. But as many of my former police officer friends say, the only person who despises a bad cop more is a good cop. Why is that the case? Because the bad cops give those good cops a bad name, and that's the truth. And so I'm actually friends with about 3 former police officers, including Pastor Ken. And so, Pastor Ken, if you're listening, Pastor Ken was a former police officer in the Bronx. I've got another friend who was a former police officer in Washington, D.C., in probably one of the roughest black neighborhoods in Washington, D.C., and another a friend who was also a former police officer in New Jersey. So the problem of systemic racism, why is the left pushing it so hard? And that's a great question, and this is why we need to understand, we need to explore the reasons why the left is so big on that. And now let me read to you a quote by Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell is a black man himself, and he's a brilliant intellectual. He's an economist, a philosopher. He's a prolific author. And he writes this. He says, black votes matter to many politicians more so than black lives. It says, that is why such politicians must try to keep black voters fearful, angry, and resentful. Racial harmony would be a political disaster for such politicians. Wow. I think he just absolutely nailed it. He absolutely nailed it. Now, Larry Elder, who's another black man, says this. Without the 90+% black vote, the Democrat Party at the national level is in deep trouble. This explains why they race bait constantly. So those are just two quotes, and there's a lot of truth to them. In fact, I'll read just one more from Thomas Sowell again because he's just so brilliant. He says, racism is not dead, but it is on life's support, kept alive by politicians, race hustlers, and people who get a sense of superiority by denouncing others as racists. Now, those three quotes that I just quoted are from black men, okay? Thomas Sowell and Larry Elder, who I think are, in my opinion, are brilliant conservative thinkers. This whole racism thing is extremely important to the left because the left is all about identity politics. It's all about identity politics. It's all about collective guilt. Okay, and this is all part of the leftist mindset. See, us conservatives, Christians, those of us who have the Christian worldview, we believe in the concept of individual sin, that we are judged differently by our sin, and we are accountable for our own personal sin. Whereas the left don't believe that. They believe in collective sin, collective guilt. This is why they believe in white privilege. Okay, they believe that if you have white skin, then you are privileged, and you need to check your privilege because there are black people. Black people don't have your privilege, which is a lie, because there are plenty of white folk, including myself. My upbringing wasn't exactly, we struggled my family struggled. I remember as growing up financially, and so there are many affluent black families who have done quite well. I will tell you one privilege that actually does exist, and that's American privilege. If you live in America, you are extremely privileged, or here in Australia is another Western nation. But again, what afforded that privilege? I'll tell you, Christianity afforded that privilege. It was Christianity that was the founding fathers, when they wrote those founding documents in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence. When you look at the amount of Christian biblical quotes and Christian statements within those founding documents, it's no wonder that your country has flourished the way that it has, and that if you are an American, that you are extremely blessed, because God has blessed your nation, and you should be, and you are privileged. In fact, it was interesting because I was listening to a quote. I listened to Dinesh D'Souza give a speech, and he's an immigrant himself. He's actually Indian, and when he immigrated, when he was making the plans to immigrate from India to the United States, one of his friends also said, yes, he says, I would love to do that. He says, I want to come to America too. And he said, well, why do you want to come to America? He says, well, I want to go to a country where the poor people are fat. He said, I want to go to a country where the poor people are fat. Now think about that. I don't mean to be derogatory or to be crass in saying that, but hear my heart in what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that Americans are some of the most blessed people, some of the most privileged people in the world, and you owe that to your foundation. What is the foundation? Well, what is the secret to America's strength? Well, there's a number of reasons. There's Christianity is the big one, your Christian heritage, but your Christian heritage led to your unity. Your unity is so incredibly strong. Your country, the name of your country is called the United States of America. The United States of America. Now, think about that. Think about that. Now, the enemy knows your strengths. The enemy knows your strength. The enemy knows that if it's going to bring America down, it has to attack its unity. How does it go about doing that? What did Jesus say? Jesus said that a house divided cannot stand. He said a house divided cannot stand. Did you know that statement that Jesus made is actually the vision of Karl Marx? The whole politics of division is the entire philosophy of Karl Marx. when he wrote the book, The Communist Manifesto, he was all about pitting the haves versus the have-nots, the oppressed versus the oppressor. He was all about, he called these people the down and outs, the ones who are the ones who worked for a scrap, the ones who did it tough. He called them the proletariats, which is a French term. And then he called the top hat wearing business owners, the wealthy, he called them the bourgeoisie. And so he wanted the proletariats to rise up and to eventually bring about a dictatorship of the proletariat, he called. And so this is really where social justice comes from. The whole concept of social justice is to deal out justice against the have-nots against the haves. This is what the whole concept is. Now, I want to read to you a quote by Henry Hazlitt. Now, Henry Hazlitt said this. Let's see if I can find this. So Henry Hazlitt said that the whole gospel of Karl Marx can be summed up in a single sentence. Hate the man who is better off than you are. Never under any circumstances admit that his success may be due to his own efforts, to the productive contribution that he has made to the whole community. Always attribute his success to the exploitation, the cheating, or the more or less open robbery of others. It's just incredible. In other words, what it's essentially saying is that never congratulate people for their success, never aspire to think that you could attain that success. No, it's always rubbing in a perpetual grievance. It's saying that anyone who earns more money than you is evil. In other words, millionaires are evil. Billionaires, billionaires are the devil, are devils. And this is the whole philosophy behind the Occupy Wall Street movement. The whole Occupy Wall Street movement with the 1%, we are the 99%. All that whole stuff was built around the whole Marxist philosophy. And this is extremely dangerous because when the have-nots get it over the haves, when the oppressed eventually rise up over the oppressors, some of the worst slaughter of human beings in the 20th century has happened as a result. This is the reason behind with what happened with the French Revolution, whereas the people they rose up against the rich, the wealthy, the royals, and the clergy, and they absolutely slaughtered them. That this is where the whole guillotine got out the guillotines and cut off all their heads. It was just a bloodbath. And then fast forward to the Bolshevik Revolution, and the same thing. There were millions of people died. What Stalin did, especially to the Holodomor massacre and the famine, the Ukrainian famine, with what Stalin instigated, where he killed millions of Ukrainians, is all down to the whole thing, the concept around social justice. It's absolutely shocking. It's absolutely deplorable, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. I want to read to you another quote, and this is from Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin, and this is after the Bolshevik Revolution, and he says this: "Comrades, the uprising of the 5 kulak districts should be mercilessly oppressed." And by the way, when he says kulak, he's referring to the rich people. Okay, the kulak districts should be mercilessly suppressed. The interests of the entire revolution require this because now the last decisive battle with the kulaks is underway everywhere. One must give an example, and this is what social justice leads to. Social justice is not about justice, it's about revenge. He says this, number one, Lenin says, hang without fail so the people see. No fewer than 100 known kulaks, rich men and bloodsuckers. 2, publish their names. 3, take from them all the grain. 4, designate hostages as per yesterday's telegram. Do it in such a way that for hundreds of versts or kilometers around the people will see, tremble, know, shout. They are strangling and will strangle to death the bloodsucker kulaks. Just incredible. That is what it leads to. And if you listen to what some of these anarchists are saying, what some of these Black Lives Matter activists are saying, what some of these hard left radicals are saying, they are saying that they want to destroy, they want to kill, they want to hang these people who they call fascists. So they are calling conservatives, such as myself and such as many of you God-loving people, they're calling us fascists, which I think is an absolute. To be honest, I think it's hilarious because it is a distortion of history with what they're trying to say. So basically, Antifa came about in the aftermath of the Second World War. And it was actually Leon Trotsky, who was the head of the Red Army, put together a division of paramilitary soldiers. These people were basically thugs. These were thugs, and these were the ones who did the dirty work. These were people who went around to people's houses and intimidated them. In fact, the whole paramilitary unit was set up to intimidate the fascists, who basically were rival socialists. They were rival socialists. So you had your Soviet socialists, which was what Trotsky and Lenin and all those guys, and Stalin, they were Soviet socialists. But then you had these fascist socialists. Fascists were socialists. And then you have Nazis who were socialists. But they just had different ideological views. They still held the same beliefs in principle, but they differed. For example, let me give you an example. So remember how we talked about Karl Marx and how Karl Marx believed in the class warfare, how he wanted to pit the haves versus the have-nots, the proletariats versus the bourgeoisie. He wanted this class warfare. Now, Hitler was a socialist, and in fact, Nazi is an acronym for National German Socialist Party. So Hitler had the same principle. It's a politics of division. The politics of division. The only difference is that the oppressed in Hitler's view were not the working class, as was Marx's vision. The oppressed in Hitler's view was actually the Aryan German race. The Aryan German race. And he said that the oppressors, who were the oppressors in Hitler's view? The oppressors were the Jews. The Jews were the ones, Hitler said they were the owners of the banks, the financial institutions, and they owned all the power. They had this conspiracy where they wanted to control the world. And Hitler's saying, and us Aryan Germans are oppressed by them. That was his philosophy. And listen, socialism doesn't change. The same thing in regard to fascism, but fascism was, Mussolini's fascism was different. Mussolini nationalized it in the sense that the oppressed was Italy. Italy was oppressed, and who were the oppressors? Well, it was the other nations that were oppressing Italy. That is what fascism is, in that sense. And so now the founder of fascism is a man called Giovanni Gentili. Giovanni Gentili is a man of the left. He himself is a socialist. Again, he's a socialist. So what happened was, people need to ask the question, what happened is that when some of these Marxist academics that were originally in the Frankfurt School, and when they came to America, they flipped the whole narrative on its head. And this all happened with a man called Eric Fromm and Herbert Marcuse. In fact, Eric Fromm came up with the idea, actually it was Theodore Adorno, sorry, came up with the idea of the F scale, which is called the fascist scale. And basically what he said is that if there were varying degrees that were all conservative values. Like if you went to church, then you were this degree of a fascist. If you homeschooled your kids and you taught them conservative values, then you were this degree of a fascist. This was the F scale. And this is how fascism began to be associated with conservatism, thanks to hard leftist Marxist professors that came to American universities, and this is how it all happened. Of course, the whole thing is ridiculous. The whole thing is absolute lie, and the other lie that comes from the left is that conservatives are Nazis, which is ridiculous. Now, what you need to understand is that yes, that the fact that the KDP, which was the German Communist Party, actually had a division of Antifa. Antifa was a part of the German Communist Party as well. And Antifa was actually used to harass the Nazis. And so that's where the whole idea is. See, this is why the Antifa says that they're against Nazis. They basically have a history of fighting Nazis. And that's true, but it's not the whole truth. It's true because the Antifa, when it was part of the KDP, was against the Nazis because the KDP and the Nazis were rival socialists. What happened is that the Nazis were the ones who seized power. And then, because once they seized power, they sent a lot of the members of the German communists from the German Socialist Party into concentration camps. But there was many of them. In fact, I think it was up to 60% of the members of the German Communist Party actually defected to the Nazis. In fact, they called them beefsteak Nazis. Why did they call them beefsteak Nazis? They called them beefsteak Nazis because they were brown shirts, Hitler's brown shirts, but they were red in the center. They were communists in the center. That's where the term brown beefsteak Nazis come from. Now, it's ridiculous to suggest that the Nazis who the left try and say are right wing, and the communists who are so-called left wing, it is absolutely crazy to suggest that Nazism is right wing and fascism is right wing. It's a lie. And it's a deliberate lie by the left to try and paint freedom-loving people who want individual liberty, people who want private property rights, people who want the rights to self-defense, people who want free enterprise, people who value freedom of speech. These leftist activists, these professors, wanted to demonize these people, wanted to demonize them as right-wing and associate good-hearted conservatives with people like Hitler. And that's how it all happened. It's deplorable, it's insidious, but this is history. And the devil is all about deception. Jesus said, watch out that no one deceives you. And this is an important lesson from history because people need to understand that the left-right political scale, many Americans think it's Democrat and Republican, but it transcends that. And as an Australian, I can say that because I don't have any affiliation with the Democrat Party or the Republican Party. Okay, but here's the thing: people need to understand the left-right political spectrum is based on a spiritual reality. There is a spiritual dynamic between left and right. Left is absolute government, totalitarian slavery, whereas the right is no government, is zero government, which really in reality is anarchy. So in reality, what is extreme? What is extreme right wing? I will tell you what extreme right wing is. Extreme right wing is basically people who just don't want a government, who don't want to have the government intrude on them. And this is why I'm a conservative and not a libertarian. Libertarians are basically what you would say would be extreme right wing. But it's not that. It's not that at all. To be right wing is just to simply. In fact, the ultimate right wing is from the book of 1 Samuel, where the people begin to cry out for a king. The people cried out for a king, but remember that Samuel was disappointed. Samuel was grieved by the fact that the people were crying out for a king. And the reason why he was grieved is because he says, look, the Lord is your king. Really, the whole scenario where there is no king and the people just live under God is the ultimate right side of the political scale. Having no form of government and living under God. And one day we will be. When Jesus comes and he reigns from Jerusalem in the millennium, that is going to be the ultimate scenario. The government will be upon his shoulders, as Isaiah says. And that we will be living and following him. And he will be reigning from Zion. That's an exciting concept to comprehend. But there is a spiritual reality between left wing, and that is total government, total slavery. All the ideologies of this world, Nazism, fascism, communism, socialism, all those isms are all authoritarian, totalitarian ideologies, and they all belong on the left. And this is, you need to understand what is the purpose behind, what is the, let's have a look, what is the spiritual purpose for that? Well, the purpose is this. When man rejects God, he believes that he can be God himself. He thinks that he is going to be more free, but in reality, he becomes a slave. He thinks he's going to become more free. He thinks he's going to come into a sense of what's the word I'm looking for? He thinks he's going to come into where everything. Anyway, the word's escaping me. It's almost 1 o'clock. He thinks he's going to come enlightened. That's what I'm trying to find. He thinks he's going to come into an era of enlightenment, utopia. But it always ends in disaster. It always ends in disaster. Whenever man tries to come up with the idea that they can be God, and this goes back to the Tower of Babel, when they thought that if we can all come together as one, and that is the whole thing behind leftism. This is the whole collectivist mindset. If we can come together as one, nothing will be impossible for us. But it never works. It never works. More people have died in the 20th century because of ideology than all other centuries. Tens of millions of people died. All because of man's quest that he could be God. It goes back to the Garden of Eden. You know, what did the serpent say? He says he doesn't want you to know. God just doesn't want you to know that you can be God. You can be like God. And that is the whole thing behind the left. The whole idea where the left, where they get to call the shots, they get to decide what's right and wrong, where they get to decide who lives and who dies. And this is the whole thing behind abortion, is where the women's so-called rights, where they get to have the right of choice. But really, it's where they put themselves in the position of God, where they get to decide who lives and who dies. It's an ideology that's based on self-destruction. It eventually leads to slavery, and it eventually leads to death. But what did Jesus say? He said, "He whom the Son sets free is free indeed." He says, when you know the truth will set you free. And Paul said, "Now the Lord is that Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom." There is freedom. That is the essence of liberty. That is the essence of liberty. And that's why the United States of America has been so blessed and has been so free because of that. And so, hi Jake, good to see you. So, and that is why the United States has been so free. It has been the beacon of freedom. And that's why the founding father John Adams he said, our Constitution is made only for a moral and religious people, a godly people. He says it is entirely inadequate for the people of any other. Let me say that again. Your founding father, John Adams, says that our Constitution is made for a moral and religious people. It is entirely inadequate for the people of any other. So there you have it. And so just to round things off, there are a lot of people in your country right now that are working really hard to bring division. They want to divide. As I said before, Jesus said that the house divided cannot stand. Jesus' statement is actually Karl Marx's vision. Okay? It's all the strategy of divide and conquer. Divide and conquer. First, you have to divide the people in order to conquer them. That is the strategy of the left, and you cannot let them. Keep speaking up and telling the truth. Keep writing letters into the editor. Keep phoning your congressman. Keep doing whatever you possibly can to ensure that you can push these leftist politicians back as you possibly can. If you can, give money to people who are taking a stand. Support your local congressmen, support your people who are taking a stand for righteousness. Remember what the Bible says, that righteousness exalts a nation where sin is a reproach for many people. Righteousness exalts a nation. And I think that is one of the most important things that you can take away from that. And just before I close out, I want to close out, but I would like to close out with a quote. And this is actually a quote, and I hope I've got a bit of time. Yes, I do. I've got a little bit of time. But I just want to share to you a quote from Alexis de Tocqueville. Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote a book about the secret of America's strength. Democracy in America was his book, and he said this: I sought for the key to the greatness and genius of America in her harbours, in her fertile fields, and boundless forests, in her rich mines and vast world commerce, in her public school systems and institutions of learning. I sought for it in her democratic Congress and her matchless Constitution. But it was not until I went into the churches of America and heard her pulpits aflame with righteousness did I understand the secret of her genius and power. There you have it, friends. That is the reason and the purpose behind America's strength and her story of her success. You know, righteousness exalts a nation. And continue to pray for your nation, because there's a lot of problems, there's a lot of division going on. And so I just want to encourage you, keep praying, keep seeking the Lord, love Jesus, love your neighbor. And in these hours, do everything you possibly can to ensure that your love doesn't grow cold. Jesus said in these last days, the love of most will grow cold. Stay hot for the Lord. Keep your heart warm for outsiders, and love as much as you possibly can. And expose what's in darkness and take a stand for righteousness. Hallelujah.